We live under a psychological condition known as capitalist realism. It's the sense that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine an end to late-stage capitalism. This system demands infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. The result is a cycle of wealth inequality and political stagnation that the state, as it currently exists, is unable or unwilling to break. This trajectory was set in the 1980s. Neoconservative policies dismantled the state's ability to act as a regulator, forcing the government to bow to the private sector at the expense of its own citizens. Neostatism emerged as a response. It is a radical ideology that rejects the slow decay of neoliberalism, proposing instead that the state reassert itself with absolute authority to fix the systems capitalism has left to rot. It argues that for a society to survive, the state must reclaim its role as the central organizer of human effort, not by waiting for a free market to solve our problems, but by forcing a new stability through sheer executive power. Every state, at its most basic foundation, is a monopoly on violence. Neostatism simply refuses to hide that fact behind a facade of civility. This violence is viewed as a morally neutral mechanic. It is the concrete foundation required to suppress external threats and internal dissent, providing the security needed for any other state apparatus to function. But a state with a monopoly on violence naturally gravitates toward tyranny. To keep a central authority from crushing its own people, Neostatism requires a structural counterweight. This counterweight isn't a legal code, but a cultural immune system. It demands 5 core virtues: vigilance, courage, intellect, vigor, and discipline. Ensuring every citizen is an armed participant forces the state into constant mutual respect. The citizens hold the state at gunpoint, and the state respects their resistance. This dynamic forces the government to be highly effective. It cannot afford the friction of corruption or slow systemic creep into tyranny, because any failure to respect the populace triggers an immediate and violent correction from the people it governs. Neostatism, severing capitalism from the market, begins with the total abolition of the stock exchange. It replaces speculative infinite growth with a focus on tangible, state-driven utility. In its place is a bond exchange. Companies can no longer sell shares or ownership. They can only issue bonds with strict expiration dates and capped values, ensuring that investment serves the business's production rather than a shareholder's portfolio. The state monitors every commercial action through the Canadian Commercial License, or CCL. This links a company's legal status directly to its social and economic performance. Corporations are tiered by their CCRS rating. An A rating is earned by paying workers enough to live without government assistance, granting the lowest tax burden. A C rating signifies an exploitative business, triggering punitive taxes or total asset seizure by the state. To further relieve the individual, the state eliminates the sales tax, viewing it as an unfair financial burden that scales most heavily against the poorest citizens. It is replaced by an algorithmic consumption tax. This scales in real time based on social necessity. Raw food carries a 0% tax, while high luxury items like private jets are taxed at 50%. By controlling these levers, Neostatism strips corporations of their political power. The economy stops being a force that rules over the state and becomes a tool used to strengthen the citizen. The trade-off for living under this heavy state structure is the guarantee of basic survival. All land becomes the property of the state. Landlords are criminalized, ending the extraction of wealth from citizens who are simply trying to secure a place to sleep. In exchange for surrendering land ownership, every citizen is guaranteed the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy. The state provides dormitory housing, abundant food, and clean air at zero cost to the individual. By taking absolute control of these macro logistics, the state removes the survival friction of modern life. When you no longer have to scrounge for food or rent, you are freed from the repetitive, exploitative tasks that define life under capitalism. This freedom manifests in radical micro-autonomy. The state permits absolute ownership over one's personal life. This includes the right to repair your own devices, the legalization of sex work, and free, unrestricted access to the entirety of the world's academic research. The neo-statist social contract is a hard bargain. The state secures your survival and eliminates the threat of homelessness, and in exchange, you grant it absolute control over the macroeconomy and the management of land. This creates a society defined by brutalist stabilization. It is a high-performance system where everyone is a stakeholder in a razor-thin tightrope of mutual threat. The state provides a floor you cannot fall through, ensuring that no citizen ever has to fight for their basic survival again. In exchange, you owe that state your discipline and your vigilance. It forces us to ask if our current socioeconomic model is an unbreakable law of nature or just outdated scaffolding that we are simply too complacent to tear down.